Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about what I think the best answer is for this question about do electoral votes represent a fair way of electing our president? So first I just want to start with what the Electoral College is. Per the National Archives and Records Administration, it's a way to elect our president that's a compromise between the vote in Congress and the vote by popular votes. There are 538 electors. That would be 100 senators, 2 for each state, and then 435 House of Representatives, votes for the House of Representative members. So if you think about how the votes are allocated, it's all based on population, and there's going to be a minimum of at least 3 electoral votes, being that 2 senators and at minimum 1 House of Representative member for each state. So each state's going to have a minimum of 3 electoral votes. So now, if you look at this diagram, you can see how the electoral votes are allocated. It's based on population. So California has a very large population, so they get 55 electoral votes. Places like Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota, all these places have like 3 electoral votes because the population is much smaller. So, what happens once the electoral votes are in? The candidate needs 270 votes in total, and a lot of states have adapted this winner takes all, or the popular vote determines the electoral votes. So especially like Maine and Nebraska, they do have that winner takes all kind of methodology where the electoral votes are determined by the popular vote. So one thing to note is the voting power. So if we look at the last census, California had almost 40 million residents, and they're allocated to 55 electoral college votes. So that's approximately 718,000 residents per 1 vote. If you look at a place like Wyoming that had 579,000 residents, approximately that much, and they're given 3 electoral votes, or they're allocated 3 electoral votes, that's approximately 193,000 people per 1 vote. So you can see that the voting power is 3.72% times the voting power that a Californian has, because almost every 4 Californians count for 1 Wyoming person. So, and if you look at the other example, Nebraska had almost 2 million residents, and they're given 5 electoral votes. That's approximately 384,000 residents per vote. And then back to looking at it in reference to Wyoming, again, Wyoming has approximately 193,000 people per vote. So they're, again, one Nebraskan is this representative, one Wyoming is representative of 2 Nebraskans. So Wyoming has a much higher voting power because it's such a smaller population. So it looks like it's in favor, electoral college is in favor for the smaller states because it takes less people to equal the same amount, to equal 1 electoral college that it would take for larger states. So I made this little diagram to just kind of show you 1 person in ratio to 4, almost 4 people for California, to show you again that the voting power is much larger. And then I explained how to determine the voting power, which was first by finding the ratio for the population of state by or to the electoral votes that's allocated. So for California, again, I mentioned it's almost 40 million, and then they're given 55 electoral college votes, so it's approximately 718,000 people per vote. And Wyoming, 579,000 people, electoral votes allotted is 3, and that's about 193,000 people per 1 vote. So then you look at the ratios, 718,000 to 1 and 193,000 to 1, and you take these ratios and look at them in reference to each other, and you can see that Wyoming has a 3.72% times greater voting power. And in this table, I just calculated the population divided by the electoral votes, which gave us that population to electoral vote ratio. And you can see that again, like DC, this is the population, the electoral vote, and this is how many people equal one vote or representative of one vote. The smaller states really seem to be in favor. So if we scroll down, I was trying to explain if it's fair or not. I really feel like maybe the Electoral College might not be the fairest situation because, like I said, the smaller population states have more voting power than the states with larger populations. The other thing to note is this kind of winner-takes-all methodology or perspective, because if 49% of the population voted for Democratic and 51% voted for a Republican, then all of the electoral votes would go for that Republican candidate or a Democratic candidate, even though the percentage was very close. So I showed a little diagram of this. So if 51% was Democratic, 49% was Republican, all the electoral votes would still vote Democratic, even though it was almost evenly split. So my answer to the question about whether or not I think it's fair, I'm not sure, but I really am leaning more towards it's not fair. I do not have a better solution at the time. I was just looking at the numbers to see what best would be representative, and I feel like it's probably not the fair system.